that, I'm also going to kick off the WebEx portion of our meeting.
We have both.
So I'm going to go ahead and we have a script that we always begin with, start our meeting recordings with. I'm going to walk through that before we move on to introductions and get our briefing from the project team today. So I just want to welcome everyone to the February 16th, 2023 meeting of the Seattle Design Commission. Our meetings are designed to meet the updates to the Open Public Meeting Act that require in-person meetings and an online attendance component for commissioners and the public. Our meetings are being recorded through WebEx and will be available later. Today from 10 until noon, we have a presentation on concept designs for the Garfield Superblock project, following our April 1st, 2021 initial review. The action today will be led by Eric Bush. We'll break at noon for lunch and then return from 12:30 to 1 for commission business. And then from 1 until 3, we'll have our first review of a proposal by Seattle Public Utilities and the Seattle Parks Department for a new reservoir facility in the Bitter Lake neighborhood, which is a significant update to the existing facility there. The action for that will be led by Vanita Sidhu. In terms of our meeting format, the team will provide a briefing on the proposal today that should last around 45 minutes, after which there will be time for public comment. We allow 2 minutes of public comment for people both attending in person and virtually, and there's a sign-up component and a hand-raising component within WebEx, so if you are attending as a member of the public and want to make comment, we'll make sure to pivot at that point and look for you. Following public comment, each commissioner will ask clarifying questions. We've been starting in alphabetic first name order with commissioners present in the room and then pivoting to commissioners attending online. I think we'll continue with that. And the follow-up to that is where commissioners will deliberate and make an action today. We'll have commissioners online start that. Their deliberation, and then have commissioners present in the room, again, alphabetic order. It's like juggling. Meeting minutes will be available a month after that. I'm going to go ahead and ask for an introduction of commissioners first in alphabetic order who are in the room, and then attending online, and then we'll have introductions of staff and then the project team. Couple more quick points. If you're online, please mute when you're not speaking. Wendy Bandekar and our staff is also hearing impaired, so when you talk during the meeting phase, please turn your video on so that will create a fuller experience for her as well as for our record. All right, I'm going to start with ask for introductions for commissioners here, alphabetic order, and I think that's does. Yes.
Yeah.
Just made a list for learning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. My name is Adam M. Ryan. I'm the Urban Planning Commissioner.
Amalia Layton Cody, Transportation Planner, Commissioner, and I'll turn my video on for deliberations.
Elizabeth Connor, Parks Commissioner.
Erica Bush, Urban Design Commissioner.
Molly Spitalnik, I'm the Get Engaged Commissioner and an Urban Designer.
And we're also joined today by Kevin O'Neill. He'll be joining the commission as a transportation planner, starting with our March 2nd meeting. Welcome. And then if I can, online, I think we're going to start with Elaine, is that right?
Yes, Elaine Wine, Architect Commissioner, and I'll be acting as chair since Vanita has recused herself this morning.
Thank you.
Pass it over to Jill, I think, is next.
I'm frantically doing the alphabet with my fingers. I'm Jill Crary. I'm the at-large commissioner.
Thanks, Jill.
I'm Matt Alfs, Architect Commissioner.
Thanks, Matt. Online today, we also have 2 new commissioners who are attending. They'll be observing today and not participating. Ben Gist.
Hello.
Hi, Ben.
Commissioner.
How are you today? And Phoebe Bogert. Hi, Phoebe. Amy, Amy or Roma, who will be leading introductions for your team?
I can go ahead and do that. I guess I'll start. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Roma Shah. I am with Seattle Parks and Recreation and project manager for the Garfield Superblock project. This morning, I'm joined by my team, Site Workshop, 5 Dot Architects, as well as the Garfield Superblock Coalition. I will hand it off to Amy and let her do and let our individual team members do their introductions.
I'm Amy Rosier with Site Workshop. I'm a landscape architect on the project. Sharon and Stephanie, you can introduce yourselves as well.
Thanks, Amy. Good morning. I'm Sharon Kosla, and I'm here representing the Garfield Superblock Coalition.
I'm Stephanie Ingram, and I'm also here representing the Garfield Superblock Coalition.
Thank you. We have 45, you're with us until noon today. We have 45 minutes for your presentation, and then after that, we'll start with the format that I highlighted earlier. Roma, are you kicking us off?
Yeah, she'll be kind of leading the show, but I'll start us off with an introduction to the project.
Thank you.
Have the graphics popped up yet? Oh, there they go.
You see it? Okay, great.
Is everyone able to see the presentation?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Great. So I want to start off by saying it's an absolute pleasure for Seattle Parks and Recreation to be collaborating with the Garfield Superblock Coalition and their endeavor to improve the site into a vital public open space. The Garfield Superblock Coalition is a volunteer group of local community advocates. They initiated this project, and since 2019, they have worked closely with SPR and the Seattle Parks Foundation as their fiscal sponsor. The coalition will continue to lead the project in collaboration with SPR. SPR is the landowner and long-term steward of the property. This project is a great example of SPR's focus on a human-centered approach to capital development projects. The community co-leads the project with SPR, and SPR supports with guidance, design review, project management, and contract administration. The existing park is located at 500 25th Avenue in Seattle. The scoped site area, as you can see, is bounded by Cherry to the north, 25th Avenue to the east, 23rd Avenue to the west, and the Teen Life Center to the south, which begins the Garfield High School campus. While the ball fields are in regular use, the rest of the park is aging and portions of it are inaccessible. The renovated park will improve access for multi-generational recreation with new play areas for different age groups and abilities, a nature play area to the east, an all ages parkour facility, and an accessible 0.3 mile loop path connecting all the way around the park. At the south property line, we are also collaborating with Seattle Public Schools. Landscape improvements will bridge across both properties to provide a unified site plan. Other upgrades include site lighting, an accessible ramp at the southeast to complement existing stair access, a multi-use court for tennis and basketball, and a reconfigured plaza around a new comfort station, which is what SPR likes to call their restroom buildings, at the northeast, which can also support a public gathering space. And finally, before I hand it off to the rest of the team to kind of dive into the details, I want to touch on the fact that this project is also critical in elevating the form and function of the park as a campus of facilities that serve this community. SPR actively supports the coalition's robust public engagement process, which will continue until design is complete. We look forward to continuing this valuable feedback loop in community venues, events in the park, and virtual meetings with the Garfield Superblock Coalition to implement this design. This planning process has already positively impacted the community by building relationships and increasing connectivity. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Amy and the rest of our team.
Thanks for the intro, Roma. I think overall today we'd like to share with you a little bit about the project history since its origin. Sharon's going to speak to that, and then talk a little bit about the project site location, then move into the pre-design, so what we shared with you in our previous presentation in April 2 years ago. Then talk a little bit about the community engagement and funding updates that have occurred since that previous meeting. Stephanie's going to walk us through that, and then I'll jump back in and talk about our current design at this 30% milestone. We'll start with the overall site plan, move in and talk a little bit about the north portion of the site, and then talk about the south and the east portion of the site as well. Sharon's going to start us off with a project history.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Roma, for that introduction, and Amy for kicking us off. Thanks for having us here today. We're so excited to tell you guys about where we are with this project currently. But just to give you a little bit of back history, I see some new names on the commission here. So, and I know all of you have this packet, but just to give you a little history. This project really started in 2005 when the Garfield High School was being renovated and Quincy Jones Theater was being added. At that time, Robert Stevens, Jr., who is the head of our coalition, I'm here representing a larger community coalition led by Robert Stevens, was really at the helm of advocating for improvements to the park during that time. The school renovations took a portion of the park for parking, and that's exactly why he was advocating for the park to also be improved. The plan that you see up on the screen was actually the landscape architect's plan back from 2005. I think Robert was able to cobble together maybe like $2,000–3,000 to hire someone to help him do this rendering. Sadly, it was never done. This plan is really steeped in public art. There's a mural inside of Garfield High School that really tells the history of all the ethnic groups that have built the foundations and roots in this central area. And he wanted to bring that story out into the park, and that's what this promenade that you see in the plan was supposed to represent. He even went as far as trying to get grants for an advisory committee from all the seven ethnic groups that he wanted to lift up, but was rejected at that time. So it never went through. Fast forward a little bit, Robert continued to serve in the central area. He worked on the 23rd Avenue Action Team for improvements all the way through the central area down 23rd. And then I met him in 2014 with the Central Area Design Guidelines. He and I sat on a community coalition that led that project to then be adopted in 2018. And so I've known Robert for a very long time. He really wanted to be here today. He apologizes that he wasn't here. He's at a doctor's appointment today, but he's still very much part of this project. Actually, our whole coalition meets. There's 9 of us that are volunteers, and we meet every week to talk about this project. We actually have a very robust meeting schedule as a group. We have several meetings every week to keep this project going, because you'll see it's quite large. In 2019, after the Central Area Design Guidelines were done, is when Robert and Karen Estevan, another coalition member, were able to get $25K from the Office of OED to then bring Site Workshop on. And that's when the rest of the coalition was really brought together. So once Site Workshop came on is when we were able to really put together a larger schematic plan and decided that, at this point, it had been long enough since the 2005 plan that we really wanted to update the whole park because it needed it. So with that, I'll let Amy take you through the project. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. I'm just going to briefly give a little project site location information since there are some new faces today. Our Superblock project is located in the heart of the Central District, just east of downtown and I-5 and north of I-90. It's kind of hemmed in by Cherry Street, Yesler, 23rd and Martin Luther King Jr. Way as its major arterials. If I zoom into the site a little bit, you can see the major access points. The blue is showing vehicular access onto the site via Cherry 23rd on the west and 25th on the east. The yellow is showing major pedestrian access routes. Same right-of-way access, a little bit of mid-block access on Cherry Street as well. And then the pink is showing internal access around the park, around the ball fields, and along the south edge by the Teen Life Center. There's also a bike lane to the north on Cherry Street as well. Some existing site condition photos. Again, just to orient you, if you've never been to the site, one of the main entries is at the north from the parking lot entry, looking at the community center. Moving down, you can see at the parking lot entry, the play space that's currently there as well, with some pretty outdated equipment, and it's a pretty inaccessible space currently. Looking at the comfort station and adjacent to the tennis courts, this open kind of plaza space with some outdated furnishings as well. Moving along the west edge, you can see the existing Meg Grabbers pool and some of the tree canopy and the major access up above 23rd. Also looking at the entryway off of Cherry towards the mid-block crossing towards Nova High School. Looking a little bit along the east edge under the tree canopy, you can also see the adjacent ball fields and the existing grassy lawn area. That's got a hillside slope. On the south edge, looking at an inaccessible pathway route along pretty much this whole edge in the current condition. You can see it's blocked by some furnishings and some utility things. And then looking at the entry off of 25th, main access is through this grand stair. Zooming out a little bit, you can see our site located at the heart of the central area. This is just a quick diagram that we pulled out from the central area design guidelines that the project team has been working on previously, this project that Sharon had already discussed, but just highlighting that this is a really important space for the community and a really important cultural placemaker. I zoom in a little bit more, looking at the project scope and goals that Roma started to discuss. Our site is located on the north half of the overall Superblock. The north half is the Parks Department's property, so the scope of work is generally park improvements around the ball fields, not doing any work within the ball fields, and then a major focus along the Legacy and Promise Promenade pathway. You can see we're drawing off of that master plan that was started earlier on in the project. Looking at the pre-design that we shared with Commission 2 years ago in April, I think the Commission was really excited about how we started to draw on that Legacy and Promise Promenade pathway along the west edge, but then really started to wrap the whole thing around the entire site so it feels like a continuous loop with accessible pathways, new welcoming entry gateways at each of the major corners of the site, high quality materials, paving and furnishings at the site, looking at play equipment and new play spaces that are accessible, parkour equipment, recreation for all ages, essentially, is what we're trying to bring to the site. A new comfort station as well, with a covered gathering space in the plaza, some game view seating that's new and a little bit more comfortable and extends the game viewing that's currently bleacher seating, community event plaza spaces, This community has a lot of events, so just making sure we're accounting for that. Accessible entry at that southeast corner where I was showing that big staircase is the only current access into the site. And then thinking about garden-like spaces and nature-based experiences on the site. We heard from the commission to start to focus on the art elements, ensuring that they have some unity and continuing to engage with the community as we develop these art pieces along the promenade pathway. We also heard to continue involving local agencies, local city agencies with our project development. We heard we needed to continue to think about funding and implementation plans, so making sure we bridge the gap in any funding or budget resources we should be finding. We also heard that finding temporary and permanent aspects for the project to be built or just to continue to maintain momentum for the project is important. And then also to continue to highlight the successes and best practices that this community group has been working on with community engagement. So to start, just responding to one of those comments and thinking about working with local agencies and city groups, we have been going back to the Parks Department for ProView reviews. We've generally heard positive feedback in our last ProViews about the west edge, how we're treating the art promenade pathway, the place-based development and how that's being consolidated. We've shifted the parkour location and worked with parks on the best place for that. Still looking at multi-use courts where the tennis courts are, and we've worked through how to start a layout that fits properly in the space. And then we've developed that southeast corner ramp for an accessible entry, some gathering opportunities, located a slide and thought about how to keep the existing trees. Stephanie's going to talk a little bit about the community engagement and funding we've been doing since the previous design.
Hey, thanks everybody. Thanks for being here. It's really a pleasure to be able to present this project with you. We just wanted to share some of the fun and exciting parts of this project for our community group as we've been developing this. We've been able to host a number of community events at the park. Some focused around art. We did some painting some giant letters that are now installed up on the, you can see them sort of in the left-hand corner there up on the community center. We've been doing some pop-up parkour events located in the park in areas in the area where the parkour park is going to be. Parkour Visions has been coming out and setting that up and hosting kind of free, parkour coaching, which has been super fun to see, kids and adults and everybody kind of playing together in that space. And participating in cleanup, events. We participated this last year in the Seattle One Seattle cleanup event. So we've been having a lot of fun out with the community, sharing the project and envisioning what it's going to be like. Next slide, Amy. We've also been very hard at work developing the arts portion for this project. We've hired a team of artists who are acting in a project management standpoint to decide or to figure out how how the artists will be selected for this project. And as part of that, we recently hosted an art academy, which is similar to the city's boot camp program. But this was very much focused on reaching artists in the neighborhood who identify with the ethnic cultures that we're going to be hiring artists for the project. So this was a completely free 2-day event. Anybody was welcome to sign up. We had speakers from Seattle and Portland, artists, fabricators. It was a really great event. We had Converge Media there documenting it, and we had great turnout and lots of people who I think are going to be interested in applying to be the artist for this project. So this was a really exciting event for us. Next one, Amy. And we've also had sort of more fundraising events. We've been focusing our fundraising very much on public dollars for this portion of the project. And so we've been having some events targeted towards those things. Back in, it was 2021, we co-hosted an event with Councilmember Sawant to raise awareness for the project, and in the process gathered, it was like 600 or 700 signatures of support for the project, and that kind of led us to getting some funding from City Council that year. We, you know, at our One Seattle event, the mayor came by and the principal of Garfield High School, so that was great. And last year we were fortunate enough to receive a federal grant in the Land and Water Conservation Fund, RCO grant, of a little over $2 million. And because of that, we were visited by the Deputy Director of the Interior, who came by because they were visiting projects around the country that had received these grants. So we had a really great event where she came out and did sort of a listening circle with our group. And we had lots of other elected officials there, Councilmember Mosqueda, Senator Saldana, and Congresswoman Jayapal was there, as well as representatives from Patty Murray's office. So it was really thrilling to be able to share our vision with people in that event. Next up, Amy. So just to share quickly with you some of our funding updates, we are currently at a project budget of about $8.4 million for construction and soft costs. The art funding is separate from that. And we have been working with lots of different funding sources. We worked with Seattle Public Schools to allocate some money from their recent levy to pay for the improvements along their property line. SDOT community funding, SDOT's community street improvements grant gave us a grant for $475,000 to do improvements along Cherry and 23rd. And we're currently working with the Healthy Streets program to decide whether we want to do something at that intersection of 23rd and Cherry to kind of solidify that corner as a part of the Healthy Streets area. We received a King County grant for a little over $200,000 to help pay for the accessible ramp on the southeast side. And then other funding has come from Seattle City Council from the REIT allocation program. We're leveraging the asset management funding allocation from Seattle Parks and Rec. And we were recently named as a project in the Metropolitan Parks District as part of the Equity Fund to receive somewhere between $1.5 and $2 million, but we don't know that number yet. And then, of course, I mentioned the federal grant that we received through the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So we are continuing to fundraise. We have about $6 million. That all adds up to about $6 million in construction funding. So we have a little bit more to go, but we're working hard to get there. And we're also in the process of starting a private campaign for the public art portion of the project. And I think that's all I have to share. Thanks.
Thanks for that update, Stephanie. Well, now I'm going to work through the current 30% design. I'm going to start with the overall site and then move to the north, the south, and the east. So our current site design maintains the same project goals that we discussed earlier. That main accessible loop path around the full site with some really great high quality materials that replace the kind of asphalt and outdated equipment that's out there right now. New play space, play equipment, play surfacing. We've shifted the parkour location from behind the comfort station over to this northwest corner of the ball fields and expanded it a bit. The art promenade pathway along the west edge is maintained. We've shifted some of the locations of the artwork, but it's still focused on along the main Legacy and Promise Promenade pathway. New comfort station in the plaza area. Gathering space has been shifted off of the comfort station and adjacent to the play area for more kind of usable space there, and in more open plaza space adjacent to the comfort station. And then looking at an accessible entry at that southeast corner where we're protecting the trees and using the hillside. So overall, this is just an accessibility diagram showing how we're working around the entire site. Major entries off of Cherry, 23rd, 25th, and from the high school to the south. And then the blow-ups, just looking at the entry to the comfort station area and plaza, and then looking at that accessible ramp entry at the southeast corner. Hardscape, again, looking at all new surfacing, essentially in the park improvements around the site with high quality materials. The red is looking at your more standard kind of cast in place concrete, but with probably a special finish or texture or color, some special scoring in the main space. Looking at the orange, which is at each of the 4 entry gateways, looking at using permeable unit paving there to kind of signify that this is a major entryway, and then also work with our stormwater strategy. Also looking at synthetic turf or poured in place safety surfacing for the play area and the parkour area and the area around the hillside slide at the southeast corner. Crushed rock surfacing along the east edge trails. Composite decking at the southeast corner ramp. We're looking at sort of a floating ramp condition where we need to stay away from the tree roots of these existing trees. Mulch areas at the east trail space, and a special pave band with an integral color or texture that follows that loop path around the entire site. In terms of planting, the north and the west and south edge, we're looking at mostly Pacific Northwest natives with climate adapted garden spaces. On the east edge and the northeast corner, looking at some lawn planting, preserving all of the existing canopy trees that we can, and then working around those with some interplanting mixed in. Mostly looking at evergreen trees along the south and the east edge, and then maybe a couple of deciduous trees in these focal points to the north and the west. In terms of lighting, our overall strategy for this lit continuous loop path is to reuse any of the existing site poles that we can. A lot of them are more focused towards the field use. So just looking at adding new head fixtures that then start to focus on the pedestrian path around the site. Adding new light poles as needed where the light feels pretty deficient. And then some specialty lighting like for the new comfort station at the main entry porch on that northeast corner. All of the artwork would have some sort of lighting effect as well. And then looking at the southeast corner ramp, post lights to highlight that new entry. The artwork has also been in development, and we've made a couple of shifts as mentioned. Still working with the art team in final locations, and we've also been shifting them to make sure we accommodate the Parks Department's need for maintenance routes along this west edge. Overall, the art team is also working on a call for artists, so we'll get a better idea of how all of these pieces are feeling united and feeling continuous along the path, the existing promenade. The overall combined art piece at the main northwest entry would have all of the 7 different artists from the 7 historic ethnic backgrounds working on it together. So they'd each have one aspect of artwork on this combined art piece, and the top of the art piece would have some sort of solar panel lighting so the piece can be lit in the evening. I'm going to move in to look at the north site development, focusing on the play, the parkour, and the comfort station area. As you can see here, we've made a lot of progress moving through Parks ProView and with our internal team. The play space has grown. We've actually combined all of the different pods that we had in this space. So that's one large play space, accessible entries into the play area with safety surfacing. It's actually larger than the existing play footprint. The artwork at the northwest corner, that combined piece, again, has a lighting effect and then some gathering space, and it's got a little special carved out focal point in the paving there to highlight it. The parkour moved again from the plaza over to this northwest corner. Comfort station remains in the plaza, but we've honed in on the layout a little bit more, looking at a water feature that's adjacent to the comfort station as well, and then the gathering space to the west of that adjacent to the play. We've also added this new porch entry at the north edge, just off of Cherry Street, looking at these major connections to the Nova High School to the north, space for kids to hang out. And then we've also been honing in on the basketball court layout in the tennis, the current tennis courts. Zoom in to the North Plaza and you can see the advancement on the comfort station. So we're looking at a slightly tipped roof, a green roof in the center, and then that all drains to a bioretention space just to the north of the comfort station with some seating along the edge. Also looking at how that open space adjacent to the comfort station can be used during events. So just sort of a layout that looks at larger kind of gathering event spaces and maybe pop-up event tent spaces as well. Looking at some views from the parking lot of the proposed comfort station with signage that then faces the street. Some murals along the blank facade walls that are adjacent to the restroom entry doors. All of the restroom entry doors now face the play area for better visibility and access. And then the roll-up doors for the concessions are along the east edge in that open plaza space next to the tennis courts. Also looking at brick material, which is drawing on the historic materials around the neighborhood and the site, and then different kind of colorful tile and mesh materials as well. If I move a little bit to the west, in the plaza, looking at the water feature and the picnic shelter, we're thinking about some prefabricated structure for the picnic shelter with a gabled roof and a large gathering group table for events underneath the picnic shelter next to the play area. The water feature, we're thinking of using a small water feature, likely the source stone with some nice color and texture so that it feels like it draws you into this space, whether the water aspect is turned on or left off. In the play area, we're still looking at how the layout of this space wants to be defined, but generally looking at a larger footprint, thinking about swings, spin opportunities, climbing, 2 to 5 age structures, 5 to 12 age structures, and new safety surfacing. This is another community engagement opportunity that we'd like to go in front of the public for to gain a little bit more feedback on as we start to develop the layout and the type of equipment we're thinking about for this space. Along that northwest corner and edge, we've shifted the parkour to this spot adjacent to the field. It would have an outer fence along the ball field edge to maintain this space. The materials that we're looking at are generally concrete vertical walls with horizontal and vertical steel bars that can be painted for a little bit of interest. And then looking at the art fence on that outer edge, working with an artist to get a more artful kind of fence that's not just a standard chain link fence there. Looking at the south and the east portions of the site. So that south edge that's currently inaccessible, the east edge under the canopy of trees, and then that southeast ramp and slide space. On the southeast corner ramp and slide, we're again looking at an accessible entry into the space. We're thinking about the ramp having more of a floating kind of bridge-like condition under the tree canopy, protecting those tree roots, and then creating some gathering spaces at the bottom of the site. So looking at seat steps and seat walls that then can be used for game viewing opportunities as well. Looking at a hillside slide, utilizing the slope here and adding a little bit of fun and interest in that area. There we go. So just looking at some model views of what that space might feel like coming down the slope along the ramp. You can see some of the new bar counter kind of game seating opportunities that we're looking at to replace some of the bleachers that are blocking these accessible pathways. Looking at gathering opportunities at the base of the seat walls and the bottom of the ramp, and then how that slide and boulder scramble kind of effect feels from the hillside. Along the south edge, we've opened up that pass-through space, and then we've provided a myriad of furnishings to really highlight the viewing opportunities and build on that with a little bit of a more featured experiences. So on the existing seat wall steps, we're looking at adding some more comfortable wood top seats, some armrests. It's adjacent to the Teen Life Center as well, so a nice spill out space for those younger users. Bar counter seats as well, adjacent to the fence, and then looking at new bleachers that then tighten up so we have that good pass-through space behind, and then porch swings underneath the tree canopy. We're also looking at a game space adjacent to that large existing concrete block wall that's by the high school parking lot above. So carving out a more informal kind of play opportunity. This is another community engagement opportunity that we're looking at going to ask the public for more feedback on what kind of game things they'd like to see in that area. Along the east.
Amy, sorry to interrupt, if you could go back, and also coordination with Seattle Public Schools as well for that location.
Right. This is south of the parks property line, so working with Seattle Public Schools on that as well. Along the east edge, we're also looking at new trail paths below the existing tree canopy, so keeping a nice soft and formal edge. There's a little bit of slope, so keeping a little bit of the lawn that's along the sidewalk as well. And then adding some logs and boulders for a more informal and interactive space just behind the game viewing. New bleachers and counter height tables around the backstop as well. And the coalition has been, as Sharon's mentioned and Stephanie's mentioned, has been keeping like momentum going for this project. Ever since 2021, they've had a lot of community events. Recently this year, they've had a number of community events and made a lot of good progress on the art along the promenade as well. They've hosted that Public Arts Academy. They're soon to have a call for artists. So moving forward, this project has has a lot of momentum going, and we're really excited to move to the next steps. That's all we have for our presentation. Thank you all for listening. I'd love to hear your feedback.
Thank you, Amy. You know, I really appreciate, before we pivot to public comment, thank you so much for taking a lot of information and distilling it down. I know we kind of pushed a little bit to keep it within a specific time frame. So I really appreciate you and the team's ability to rise to the occasion. So thank you. Elaine and Erica, I'm not seeing anyone attending, a member of the public attending online. If there's a member of the public that's attending online that wants to make comment, or any other city agency representative that wants to make a comment, just raise your hand in the chat function and we'll recognize you. For people who are attending online, for people who are attending online, we have one individual in joining us today who's attending the meeting. I'm not sure that they want to make a comment. Okay, thank you, Ryan. So it doesn't appear that we have anyone interested in public comment today, Elaine or Erica. Okay. So I think we'll just maybe move on to the next phase, which
will be questions.
Commissioner questions. And I think when I rambled on in the beginning of the meeting, I think I said that we would start with commissioners in alphabetic first name order here in the room, and then go online. Oh, did I start online?
Yeah.
Okay.
But either way.
Okay. Why don't we start online? Okay. And I think that would be with Elaine.
That would be with me. Okay, great. I had some questions regarding the comfort station, and I was hoping you could put up the enlarged plan of the comfort station and just the programming of that station, because it appeared that there are restrooms, there's a concession area, and then there's a space, a more utilitarian space for a tractor. And there we go. And I was hoping you could speak more towards the tractor and the requirement for that, and then why it was placed in the center of that building.
Do you want me to start, and then maybe Steph and Sharon, you can jump in? I can at least talk to the fact that the utility tractor is actually like a mower, and it needs to access the existing ball fields, kind of in this funky north area. So it needs to come out of the building somehow and get into, make some turns and get onto the ball field space via this entry gate. We also were advised by the Parks Department to specifically locate the restrooms on this west edge and face the play area. And then we were also directed to put the concessions in a space that has a large sort of plaza opening. So the tractor is required. I'll let maybe Stephanie or Sharon chime in as well as to the sort of overall layout.
Yeah, I mean, we're essentially replacing this building in kind to what's already there. The existing building has, in fact, a very similar layout, except it's old. And so, we're providing the, restrooms that are ADA and adjacent to the playground, and then the track. There's just this how the tractor gets from the from its home to the field is a pretty it has to work with the grading, and the concessions area, we're calling it more of a community concessions as opposed to a true concessions. It's not like we're going to be hiring a concessionaire to run that space. It's going to be the kind of informal thing where baseball teams can come and sell chips and hot dogs, and community groups can come and host an outdoor event with barbecues and stuff. So the idea is to be able to kind of throw open those doors, have the space kind of spill out. There's some sinks and plumbing, but it's not a commercial kitchen or anything like that. So
Great.
that, and there, as opposed to putting the tractor there, there's a inclination to that tennis court area is now kind of this weird dead space, and we want to be able to have that space in between the building and the tennis court feel much more welcoming. And we're adding basketball to the tennis courts, and so it should be much more inhabited than it is right now. It's pretty underutilized, and so we see people gathering in that area, and that edge of the building will be much more engaged. So that's sort of where we got to.
Okay. Great.
With that.
Thank you.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And then my next question has to do with the art locations. And I was wondering, and I couldn't recall from the presentation, are you providing power, or I'm just wondering how prescriptive they are, because I think when you hire artists, are you saying this is your area that you have to work within, or is there ability for them to sort of look at the plan as a whole and think about how they might integrate their work with the plan, as opposed to saying, here's your 3x3 spot?
You want me to talk to that, Amy?
Go.
Sure. Yeah, you go for it.
At the moment, we're hoping to have the foundation of each of the artworks part of the landscape architecture's construction document, so that each artist will be given the same kind of base, which will have power, and it will be an accessible kind of base. The current thought is that each of the artists will come up with their design and there might be a third-party fabricator that will be fabricating all of the art pieces to bring some consistency to the piece. And we're also thinking that will bring a lot of different artists to the table if they don't have the capacity to fabricate what they really want to design. So yeah, that's where we are.
But are you saying, like, within these instances, you're expecting that they're three-dimensional sculptural elements, as opposed to somebody coming in and saying, I want to do something two-dimensional as part of this walking path?
Right.
Okay.
They're three-dimensional. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then
Sorry, go ahead. I think it's important to note like how our process has been run. Our kind of arts team is a group of local artists in the area, and they've been crafting this master plan. And we're in the process of working with a selection committee that's going to be made up of people from each of the different ethnic groups. And so I mean, this is a hugely complicated way to select the art, but we're going to be asking this whole group to kind of get together and help develop. The vision is already there, but we're going to be fine tuning the vision before we select the artists, so that the artists are selected with kind of one vision in mind. We wanted to keep the product of the art relatively simple, as opposed, because we're working with so many different artists, having them all come in and have different ideas about how they wanted where they wanted their art to be, felt unworkable to the team. So we're trying to make it simple. There's going to be opportunities for other artwork, like Amy was mentioning, along the parkour fence. The restroom building will have some art on it. So there's other opportunities for different artists within the community, but this promenade is almost envisioned as one piece of public art that we're hiring 7 different artists for. So
okay. Thank you.
And I would like to add to that also, although this is our current thinking, we are in the process of putting together a pretty robust outreach to the community about this process in general. We're getting feedback to make sure that this is kind of the right way to go forward. But as Stephanie noted, we have put together a really fantastic arts team that's headed by Elishba Johnson of Wanawari. She's had a lot of experience in the public arts realm, and so she's really kind of taking in all the information she's getting from the arts team in the community, and putting the art, putting together the master arts plan that was actually written by Esther Irvin, who's a public artist in the central area as well.
Couple more. I'm not familiar with parkour, and I was curious about that. Was that a specific community request? I don't know how, I was looking it up while we were chatting, and I see people jumping and doing some sort of courageous things. And I was just wondering, is this something that has, I guess, longevity in terms of, or is it something that's like a fad now?
We think it's great. We've been working closely with Parkour Visions. That's a local nonprofit that runs, that teaches and coaches parkour camps like all over Seattle. Their camps are wildly popular, and they came to us and said, we'd really love to find a place for a public parkour park in Seattle. There's one in Bellingham, but as far as the rest of the whole West Coast, there aren't many public parkour parks. And to kind of prove their concept, they've been coming and setting up these apparatuses at some of our events. And it's really, really good. I mean, you can look online and it looks like it's crazy, athletics, but it's really fun for kids of all ages. And you see, everybody comes and it's just from balancing on a small beam to the much more advanced people who are jumping, and they all kind of, work around themselves. And it's very, very activating and super fun to watch. And we felt like it would be a great place to have this here, and a very unique thing in the city of Seattle. Parkour Visions is committed to programming in that area. Their camps are full all summer long. They do lots of free stuff for people, and so we think it's a great addition to the park and a super unique feature.
And is it something that when you look at it, I mean, intuitively, when I look at the structures of it, I'm not clear what I would do there, or is it something that people would need training to utilize?
No, I could add to what Stephanie's saying a little bit. I mean, I think the idea of parkour actually grew out of just jumping and running on everyday items like benches and walls that are in our landscape. So it wasn't, these parks weren't kind of designed. The idea of parkour came out of using things in the landscape in the built environment to just bounce and jump off of. Okay, so they've kind of pulled that into this idea that you could just use bars or walls or everyday objects to play off of. So you don't really need any classes. As Steph mentioned, Parkour Visions is really committed. This would be the first parkour park in Seattle. They've been working with the South Seattle community for a long time to kind of bring these programs to the community. So this will be the first official parkour park in Seattle, which we're really excited about. And it has been extremely popular.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that kids look at that and they're like, oh yeah, we know what to do here. We run and jump and climb and whatever. And as an adult, you might not do that, right? But this is a place where adults can also do that, and they can get instruction to do it. It just opens up a lot of cross generational play.
And then have you gotten any requests, because pickleball has become so popular around Seattle? And I mean, you've got this multi-use court. I see there's tennis court, there's there's probably going to be a lot of competition for those courts. Has anybody requested pickleball lines or anything like that?
We did a survey at the community center and put out pickleball, basketball, and tennis. and basketball was by far and away the most popular. You know, we're adjacent to 2 high schools here, right? And so, and it's like we're in the middle of the central district. Like there should be basketball in this site, and there just isn't. And the tennis courts get used by the high school for their high school for like the JV team practices there. So we couldn't quite get rid of the tennis courts, and so we just decided to leave. The pickleball was down lower, and people can come still play informal pickleball there, but we're not going to stripe it for it.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, those are all of my questions. So I will pass it on to Jill. Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine. You guys have done an amazing job of putting this private-public team together. And I'm wondering if on your funding pages, you could explain a little bit more about how you see going forward. What parts of this are public projects? What parts you see being privately administered? Are all the private funds being raised going to be commingled with the public funds? Is the coalition the entity that's going to manage the private funds? Any thoughts that you have about that would help?
It's complicated. It's our big picture is that we're trying to raise the bulk of the construction funding from public sources, and so most of the in fact, I think all of the sources that you see here would count in our minds as public sources: Seattle Public Schools, federal funding, SDOT. We are in partnership with Seattle Parks Foundation as our fiscal sponsor. So any money that gets allocated directly to Garfield Superblock is managed by Seattle Parks Foundation. The art portion of the project, we're targeting doing a private fundraising campaign, mainly because we don't want to be kind of beholden to requirements from a lot of the public funding sources around that. So yeah, it's complicated. We're piecing it together. Do you want to add into that, Roma?
Yeah, I would sorry. I would say our capacity money is also publicly funded.
That's true.
And the capacity money for the 6 staff that we have as part of our Garfield Superblock team, that capacity money sits with Seattle Parks Foundation, and the construction money sits with Seattle Parks and Recreation.
So this page then, it has a total construction budget of $8.4 million. That's envisioned being managed as a public project that the Parks Department would put out to bid ultimately?
Yep, exactly.
And then arguably the Seattle Parks Department would be responsible for the maintenance of everything there then?
Correct.
And then would they be responsible for the programming, or does the programming flip over to the coalition and the Parks Foundation?
Ideally, that would be a partnership. We would work together to activate and to program the space.
And so have you started conversations about what ongoing money for programming would be, where it would come from?
We have talked about putting together a friends group after the coalition, after the project is complete. The coalition would probably turn into a friends group that would,
Particularly for the maintenance of the artwork, I think the
right.
friends group. As far as like site programming, the community center is right there, and
the community center. This community center at the moment doesn't have a recreational leader, so we already know that's something we want to be advocating for as a group and as a community. So we will definitely be doing that.
So then, on the public art, it says that you have 12% of those funds right now. That's the 1% for art?
No, that's just private fundraising.
Okay.
Donations that we've received so far.
Is the
we're not doing the 1% for art. We're going to do it privately funded. So we're going to have a capital campaign for private funding for the art, so we can have more than 1%.
Right. So that's why you don't have a 1% line in your 8.4 budget, because you're going to do it differently than that.
Correct.
Right.
And then who's going to? So is it the coalition then, and the Parks Foundation is your sponsor that's going to administer and manage the art project, and is already doing administering and managing art?
Yes.
So the art is the private component to the project then, really, when we think about
Yes.
the public and private. Okay. That was sort of implied in a bunch of things, but I just wanted to make sure that I really understood that. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Mhm.
I think we
I guess
then
it's
pass
also
on to Matt.
the Seattle Public Schools will be, there's a joint use agreement between Seattle Public Schools and Seattle Parks and Rec to administer or maintain the land that's on their property versus ours, versus the rec.
And there's history of that happening. So that's not a new,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Just to clarify, the joint use agreement covers the fields and it will cover the tennis court. Seattle Parks and Recreation is working with SPS currently on a memorandum of agreement to kind of codify the relationship of that south side of the site where improvements bridge the property line. So we're actively engaged on, how to clarify roles and responsibilities there.
With the school district. Great. Thank you so much.
Sorry, guys, just for note taking, could you clarify what you had mentioned about ongoing maintenance of the artwork, where that would fit within jurisdiction?
We're planning to have a Friends of group.
Okay. Thank you.
I think we have Matt next, and then after Matt, we'll pivot to Adam here at City Hall. Matt?
Great. I think this is a wonderful project. I do have a lot of comments. I'm really interested to talk about a few of the elements, but I don't have any questions. So I'm going to save my time for comments. Thanks.
Right. Yeah, thank you to the team for the excellent presentation and project. I guess a lot of my questions are about parkour, so let's just get into it. I saw in one of the drawings that it was noted a potential location. Are the program elements still flexing, or is that an old note, or what's your thought there?
That was a old note based on a previous ProView with Seattle Parks and Recreation. As the team noted, we've gone through a few design iterations trying to find fit the parkour. As you can see, it's a super tight site, and there is a lot of community interest in finding a home for parkour. And one of the things that the team realized is that this northwest corner was a little underutilized in that, when you look at the clearances required from home plate for the 3 existing ball fields, there was a bit of an opportunity. Yep. And, to really make a meaningful parkour space, there was a certain footprint we needed, which we couldn't quite fit in a lot of other places. And so we worked really hard with knowledge area experts at Seattle Parks and Recreation to find a home for parkour, and recognizing that there's a comfort level and a little bit of risk about fly balls, and really putting something like this on the fields in our first iteration of this plan. There was additional vetting that needed to happen, so that's why it was put as potential location. And just recently we went through the ProView process for the latest milestone, and so far things are looking good. So I believe we can say that this is the current location, and I think the major change that you'll see is we got comments to increase the fence height just to provide additional protection to folks that are using the parkour equipment when a game is in progress.
Got it. Thank you for the clarification. That all makes sense. And then you mentioned, I love the way that you were doing the outreach and involving community members. I think that's really cool. But you mentioned Parkour Visions being kind of affiliated with the project. Could you say more? Who's actually designing the facility? Is it Parkour Visions, or is it the landscape team, or who's doing the actual design work?
Parkour Visions is actually designing it, but they're working with Site Workshop to do that. So it's kind of and the community group for that matter. So it's kind of a collaboration between all of us.
Okay, That makes sense. And then I saw in a couple locations, I think maybe on this page or maybe another page, it looks like you were indicating like a rubberized flooring, but then at the beginning of the presentation, someone had indicated turf. I was wondering if you could clarify what you were thinking of for the kind of ground surface of the facility.
We haven't finalized the safety surfacing. We just know it doesn't want to be play chips. So it's safety surfacing, yeah, turf or poured in place. It could be either one. I think we're probably leaning towards turf. At least in this location, maybe poured in place in the play area for like, color, but again, we haven't decided, and I feel like that is probably a part of this community engagement opportunity as we start to look into the play space equipment as well.
Got it, thank you. And then, if I'm not confusing this with another project, and I think I know the answer to this, but I thought I saw on an earlier version of this a climbing wall. I just wanted to confirm that is out of the program.
Yes, we did have a climbing wall possibly at the south edge where that big concrete block wall is, and that's the space that we've actually shifted away from being a climbing wall. We found, it would actually be really complicated to do that one because it's on the Seattle Public Schools property side, and they weren't feeling very comfortable with it. And then we also were looking at sort of clearances and sort of the height of the wall and sort of what your play value gets out of what the height of the wall could be. So we started to move away from that and say maybe it's more of an informal open game space in this area.
Got it, thank you. Just kind of jumping around through some elements here. Lighting, it looked like you were mostly kind of improving existing lighting and then adding some supplemental lighting. I was wondering if you could say more about the kind of intended hours of operations, specifically maybe around some of these features that people might want to use, throughout the evening, especially in the darker times of the year. So just what your goal was with the lighting. Is it supposed to be lit at night so it's usable at night, or is it really a kind of a daytime facility? This is the question.
I think it's mostly intended to be lit at night, probably similar to what the pedestrian lighting that's currently on site is doing as far as hours of operation and maintenance and all of that. But yeah, it's mostly to highlight the features in the evening.
Got it.
The fields are lit, especially during the summer when it gets, during the soccer season, there's like endless soccer games out here and football, and so the fields are lit some portion of the evening, like bringing the rest of the site up to kind of that, so it's not this dark, scary loop around the site while the soccer and football are going on.
And a lot of the lighting layout is also driven by septet concerns. As Stephanie was mentioning, certain parts of the site are pretty dark, and with our early nightfalls in the fall and winter, just providing some pedestrian level safety lighting is definitely a priority for this project.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I had a lot of questions about art, but I'm going to save this for Elizabeth because she'll do a better job. And then my final question is, I just saw in some of your renderings, GSB, I assume it means Garfield Superblock. Is that the name of the project, or is that just kind of a placeholder for the renderings, or could you say more about that?
I'll let the community leaders talk to that, but yeah.
Are you talking about the big GSB on the comfort station?
I think that is where I saw it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a placeholder right now.
Yeah, it's because we made those letters that are already up on the, on the building. We just kind of threw something on there just to show that we could put signage, or we could put, I think at one time we had something like "Welcome to the CD" on there as well. So we haven't figured out what that would be yet.
I see. Thank you. Okay, that's it for me. Right.
All right. Thank you. I would like to focus my questions on site access and accessibility. So if you'd be able to go to the accessibility page, a piece that I want some clarification on is there's a lot of modes that serve this site, and there's a lot of opportunity. There's so many things going on, as you mentioned. You really need to leverage all of these different access points and leverage kind of where there's already, transit service versus parking versus accessibility. So my question is, could you talk a little bit about how you've focused these accessibility lines with those access points? I'm seeing some disconnects, but I just want to make sure that you have the opportunity to speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, we definitely have been trying to open up the major gateways at each of the corners of the site, and then at some of the mid-block areas. I know there are, bus access on 23rd and on Cherry, more of a sort of quieter street on 25th. And we've obviously also heard that the south edge, getting over to 23rd and being able to access those bus lines, has been really important. So that's a major part of our kind of full loop and then major entry point kind of development. Mostly using the sidewalk entries, I guess, overall at each of these sort of major entry gateway spots, off of Cherry here and here, off of 25th, off of 23rd as well. And then, yeah, the same thing for the southeast corner ramp, getting you into the site in an accessible way that's not currently happening.
Could you expand a little bit more on the conversations along with SDOT for the $476,000 improvements on kind of what needs to be focused on, maybe the east and potentially the north, particularly the northeast of the site? Could you talk a little bit more about that scope?
Yeah. So, I mean, Steph and Sharon, you can chime in, but we've been looking at improvements along Cherry and 25th. The sidewalk and the curb and curb ramp situations on both streets are pretty poor. They're crumbling, they're falling. So looking at ways to improve that has been a high priority for this project. We've been working with SDOT though, and I think the community group, got a funding source in it. SDOT has approved, I guess, a grant to move forward with these improvements on both streets in tandem to our project. So I think, major sidewalk improvements that SDOT is going to move forward with are going to be really important for all of these major entry gate opportunities.
And just practically speaking, is that going to be built by SDOT, or will that be folded into this project? And I think the timeline was, ideally these improvements would be done, and some improvements would be done by 2025. Just how does that timing line up with those specific SDOT improvements?
Right. I don't know specifically, maybe Sharon or Steph you've heard recently, but this is definitely separate from this project. So SDOT will be constructing it. Okay. Timing, it will likely go in before our project, but I'm not entirely sure.
Okay. Yeah, Roma, you've been in contact with SDOT about it, right?
Yeah, we've started since the award announcement. We've started to engage and talk about scope and timeline, and most ideally we would like to coordinate the two projects, but given the scale and the complexity of our project, SDOT will likely be ready to perform the work sooner than we are. But again, we only got news of the grant award end of last year, so we're still working through those details. But from our current understanding is the right-of-way work would happen ahead of our project.
Great. And then
I will say there's also some significant community input on this, because on 25th, the people park off of that road, just like pull right up onto the curb and park in the grass along there right now. And that's been a big problem for the neighborhood and for the site. And so part of our goal with this project is to make it so that doesn't happen.
the other piece that I didn't see in the site plan, but maybe I missed it, is there going to be any bike parking?
We haven't currently been showing any new bike parking, probably preserving any existing parking. I know that there's some existing bike parking at the community center entry over here, which, you know, the main bike lane and bike access is off of Cherry Street.
Okay. And then last question, I'm gonna phrase this as a question. How could you talk a little bit more about I understand there's a lot of trees and tree roots. Where my question is headed is I have some concerns about accessibility and all of the pavement changes and the predictability of that surfacing and the width of those various surfaces. So could you talk a little bit more how you thought about, like, for example, the slide at the southeast corner? You're having a slide go down into what appears to be a constrained location. That's a major, you know, accessibility access point. You've got the parkour where I've seen parkour camps and like they're running everywhere, and like then you have these 4-foot accessible paths, and then you're transitioning from asphalt to composite decking to permeable surfaces. And so if you could just talk a little bit about how you have overlaid those surface treatments and the transition specifically between those surface treatments with your accessibility plan, and just thinking about, again, the kind of intensity of these different access points where from my perspective, what I can see in these drawings, it appears to be you're really going to that minimum of 48 inches.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll start with the north area. Overall, we're doing all new surfacing. It'll all be new concrete or new permeable paving with filled joints, and then looking at transitions as probably flush curb between each, so that's a nice flush transition. Curb ramps were needed for the sidewalk entries, but generally I think we're doing flush, otherwise pretty flush sloped walks. The entry off of Cherry, like this sidewalk, this is a existing width that we're maintaining at I think 5 feet. Similar access here. The access along the west edge has actually been widened, but we're still steering clear of all of the tree, sort of existing tree edges where the surfacing is currently at. So we're meeting anything that's, you know, currently adjacent to tree roots and then expanding where they're essentially not. This path is a 10-foot wide minimum path. Actually, we have to have that for parks maintenance staff to get through. This slope path we are redoing to actually bring that up to accessible code. Right now it's not currently accessible. So a little bit of regrading there, new surfacing, so it'd be a concrete, I think 5-foot path here. The entry here would have an existing curb ramp that we'd be connecting with, and then transition over to permeable pavers, again, probably a flush curb, surfacing at any of the major transitions there. Along the south edge, that is existing pavement edges that we would meet and then expand in these tight spots as well. Avoiding the trees, though, this walk here is the existing pavement edge where that is currently a concrete sidewalk, so we're not going beyond that. Along the southeast corner, so we have our new accessible ramp down into this space. We do have this whole area actually is not currently accessible. There's like a planter strip that divides these two spaces kind of right at the property line, and it's got a funky slope. So we're looking at fixing that, bringing that up to code. So this is all, you know, flush at grade, nice transition there. Along the east edge, these existing trees that we're coming tight to, that is also, again, existing pavement edge that we'd be maintaining and not going past under the canopy. We actually deviate and move a little bit away from it under some of these other trees to then, you know, meet up with this new gateway entry that's flush with the sidewalk here. So overall, I think our goal is to not, impede further in any of the tree root zones. It's actually to push it out in certain areas. I don't think I mentioned actually this area too. This is a space where the pavement is actually way tighter to the trees. It's like right up on the major trunk and roots. And so we're actually pushing out and expanding the tree root zone, giving them a little bit more breathing room, and then have a 5-foot path offset from that.
And I would just like to add to what Amy said. SPR also recognizes that a lot of, with all the hardscape, it is a little tight to the trees, and we are actively working on getting a site walk organized with SPR Urban Forestry to get ahead of some of these issues. So it's something we are actively working on.
Thanks. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Commissioners, just because I have to do my job, we're 11:25, so to make sure that we can wrap up by noon. I think we're on to Elizabeth.
Yes.
I seem to be really
We'll bring you
unable
up to
to
alphabet.
understand how the alphabet works today.
Nope,
So
I'm next. I have a list too. I'll call it out.
thank you.
I really appreciate all the energy involved in this, and I think you're doing some really bold and complex things. So some of my questions are related to that. Is your call for artists going to be local, or what's the spread for the request for artist involvement?
As Stephanie mentioned, we have an advisory team that we've just started putting together. So there's two people from each of the 7 ethnic cultures. And that will be sort of up to them. At this point, at least that's what we're thinking. That'll be sort of up to them to go into their to find the right artist from their culture to come in and do the project.
So you mentioned the possibility. I think you have very clear desires for what you want the art to be doing in several different places. So it sounds like a series of plinths that are related to the pathway that have a certain narrative, and I think that's definitely a way you can proceed. I think it makes sense to be that clear at this point. So you, I guess I'm wondering if the overall site design, as the art selection goes forward, some of these decisions are made by the art team, or is that going to be incorporated into conversations about the site? As that happens, you're in a slightly different schedule, but appropriate for what you're looking for. So say the selection panel pulls in artists that might be doing something that you have interests or things that are coming into the site that you might not have expected. Can the intentions of the overall design and the site going forward move to accommodate that, or will you be looking very, very specifically for people doing certain?
That's a good question. We've been having these conversations back and forth constantly. Like, do we let the artists come up with their own bases? Do we let them fabricate their entire pieces? Do we let them decide where they want to put their art? But I think because there are 7 pieces, and because we wanted to bring in some consistency and kind of dictate a little bit of the quality of the pieces, we've kind of come to the conclusion it's better to put a few constraints on what's going to be brought to the site. So, we are just at the point where we're bringing these advisory teams. We actually have a gathering together in March where we're all going to meet, 30 some people that are part of this team now, both hired and volunteer, to really talk through a lot of these things. And so we're hoping that there is still time for feedback and flexibility. We haven't kind of closed the door on that yet, but this is as the public arts team has been really trying to get into the nitty-gritty of how these pieces are going to go into the ground and come up with some ideas, at least around how we can throw out some constraints. So that's kind of where we're headed right now, but we are still definitely open for some flexibility. If these our advisory teams bring other ideas to the table, we're open to hearing it.
Yeah, I'm glad you're keeping those two things going along simultaneously. One of the things that occurred to me is that to look at, as Amalia was talking about going back through the accessibility program, look through your lighting program, because you do have some really amazing lighting challenges, and it's very rare for a group to say from the get-go, before any artists engaged, we're going to light the artwork. So how does that are you thinking about how maybe the artwork might also act as a lighting element, or the lighting for that artwork? That may be a rhetorical question right now, but that's what came to mind, is something that is overall site design that might interface even with a very specific kind of plinth-based series of artworks. I guess that was a comment, I'm sorry. I didn't do as good a job as Amalia did. So one more question. You're doing privately funded artwork in a public space. So do you have some resources for precedence in terms of contracting, and how some of these decisions might be made? Because that adds a little bit of complexity. It's a good idea. And it adds some complexity to some of the legalities and intellectual property and things like that.
We've definitely been exploring these conversations, and as we mentioned, we are hoping to put together a friends group. We have reached out to the Office of Arts and Culture to kind of talk about some of these issues as well. So, we don't completely have this all figured out, but we are definitely working on it.
Yeah, the Office of Arts and Culture is a great resource. Yeah. So that answers my question. On to Erica. Thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks, guys. This is an incredible project. I'm so excited to see it move forward. My questions are looking at sort of like the larger, I guess, functionality of the space, because I wasn't able to review when you first came up to us. So I'm sorry if these are a little bit repetitive, but could you describe what the engagement or feedback was regarding the usage of the ball fields? It just feels like there's so much programming happening in such a finite space. And I know in a lot of other places around the city, we're not seeing the higher utilization of these fields as some of the other program elements in the site. So I'm just curious about retaining that much of the space for them.
I can jump in on this one. So these ball fields are some of the most heavily used in the system. There's a really active Little League and Booster Club. Also, these fields are kind of not their own thing, but I mentioned previously the joint use agreement with Seattle Public Schools. So in addition to community and residents using the fields, this is primarily where Garfield High School plays, and also the ball field that you see at the northeast is a clay field, which the women's softball team uses. And so because these are covered by the joint use agreement, I mentioned before, like introducing the parkour program was a little bit of us kind of thinking outside of the box to leverage that one underutilized corner. And so we do need to preserve the ball fields. They kind of are dictated by a separate program from like play area renovations, given the materials and the usage. They have a, SPR planning department monitors the life cycle replacement. And so, we need to keep the fields intact given the need.
Great, thank you, Roma. That really helps. My other question was that I know the space immediately adjacent Medgar Evans Pool is utilized pretty heavily by skateboarding. And I was curious if that was a conversation about if that use would be relocated within the site, or considerations for elements either being accessible or protected from the skateboarding community that currently is in the area.
I can jump in on this one as well. Sharon, Stephanie, Amy, if you have anything to add, please do. I believe you're talking about that kind of platform that you see essentially to the north in this image, in the plan image.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so this is a little tricky. As we mentioned in the community engagement portion of the presentation, we were thrilled to receive the RCO Land and Water Conservation Act funding. And part of our program scope, Medgar Evers Pool is outside of that scope, and for a lack of a succinct way to explain like kind of the legality and rules around that funding, we've heard from community stakeholders that that area is an area of concern. It is not currently within the project scope, partially due to some of these funding constraints. But we're hoping that with the park renovation and having more kind of eyes on the street and a more activated site, that we can, make sure that activities are appropriate activities are occurring there. But to my knowledge, I would need to check back with SPR. We don't have any, to my knowledge, active plans to, what am I trying to say, to prohibit skateboarding in terms of the scope of this project.
Great. No, it wasn't. Yeah, it was more about whether that usage was sort of being thought about as a programming element of the space. So thank you for that. And then my next question relates to that to an extent. It was something that was mentioned, I think maybe by Sharon's comment to Elaine earlier, that parkour has developed as an activity similar to skateboarding that responds to your urban environment and the existing features within it. And so I was curious what the thinking was with the group you're working with, of having a dedicated parkour space versus integrating elements that could be used for parkour throughout the design of the entire site.
Yeah, parkour actually did an engagement session at the park. We had a community, they invited people from the parkour community in Seattle to come out, and we talked about that. But there was a large interest in having a place where they could have like a parkour gathering or a parkour sort of mini party, if you will. And that can't really happen if it's spread all the way around the park. And so it was kind of an overwhelming feeling among the community group that came out to help design the area, that we should put it in one place together.
Great.
That's not to say that the new elements that Amy and Site Workshop have put all over the park won't be used for parkour in some way or form. I think we're adding a lot of things that can certainly act as that.
Awesome. And then my last question was relating to the southwest corner. It seemed like that entry on the southern end of Medgar Evans is pretty constrained, and it looks like there's an art plan for sort of like dead within the center of that access point. So I was just hoping to understand a little bit more about how that entry was functioning and if it was still allowing for visibilities or sight lines and lighting, just because it seems so tight.
It is a fairly tight entry, and we're still working with the art committee to kind of better understand fine-tuning the locations of all of the artwork along the west edge. And this one, as you say, it's it is sort of centered in this major entry gateway space that comes from the high school in the parking lot, but we've been fine tuning, like maybe shifting it inward a little bit or maybe pulling it out towards the kind of planter edge so that you have a more open sequenced entry along the pool edge.
Great. And with that, I'll hand it off to Molly.
Okay, so I will keep it quick because I know we're constrained on time. So one question with the roughly 6 million available, I'm curious what your remaining funding gap is looking like and whether there are specific areas that are being prioritized with existing funding or areas that are thought to be later in time, or if the funding goals are really to develop across the site simultaneously.
Yeah, we think that we need about another 2.8 million to get to construction funding. Our goal right now is to raise it all. You know, the Land and Water Conservation Fund has a certain grant has a certain scope to it, so those things will be certainly prioritized, and that the King County grant for the ramp, that's a priority as well. You know, we don't have a particular scope that we are targeting to pull out right now. So that's that's our approach at the moment.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And I will pass it back to Erica.
Okay.
I would like to make a suggestion. Matt made such a compelling case with his slate of questions that I'd like to start with him on.
It's a great idea.
We are, and for Amy and the team, we are transitioning to commissioner kind of deliberation and comment. So they may reach out to you if they have a clarifying question. And at the end, if you heard something that didn't make sense, just let us know. But I think what we'll do is go ahead and start with Matt, then Elaine, and Jill had to drop off. She had some kind of internet problem, so we won't include her. So I think Matt, Jill, and Elaine, or excuse me, Matt and Elaine, and then we'll pivot back to the room.
I see Jill. I see
She's
Jill
back.
in the participants, but muted. So we might double check when we get to Jill.
So Matt, the floor is yours.
Oh, sure. Thanks. Oh, I'm really excited by this project. Tremendous presentation from the group. Thank you very much. Just at a high level, I think the idea of a loop path is wonderful. I think it's going to get so much use. You know, people walking with friends, or doing loops for exercise, and then there's all these different episodes that you can experience along the way. I think it's wonderful, and I think the design is bringing together a bunch of different uses, a bunch of different ideas, and really elegantly. So I'm really excited about the direction. I'm excited about the community engagement that's occurred. I think it's really wonderful. A couple thoughts. Because I'm the architect commissioner, I'm more focused on buildings and things like that. And there's so many wonderful landscape and planners on the commission. So I think I'll turn to a couple of thoughts on elements. The bridge ramp at the south east corner, I think is a really nice idea that we're not cutting into the soil as much and impacting the roots. I do think that's going to take a lot of design development because it's essentially a structured ramp. And I'm just wanting to point that out, that I'd be interested to see the materiality, the structural elements that lift and span that walking surface. There's some complexity probably related to the railing systems if they're not embedded in the ground, which is, I think, great. But, there's probably a lot of steel detailing that's going to happen there. And I think it'd be great. I think it'll probably be expensive, probably really well worth it. I'm in fully support of it. I'm just sort of pointing out that I can see a lot of design work needing to happen there to make that piece come together. But I love it. Just another positive comment. I'm really excited about the idea of the art, the idea that there are representations from these 7 communities that have historically been in this neighborhood. Many of those communities, of course, were excluded from other parts of the city with redlining. So I think it's a wonderful thing that you could pass through the loop and encounter art, and that there's art elements that are made, some, I guess, specifically by the each community, and then there's some joint projects. That's my understanding. Really interested to see how those might come together, what the materiality is. It seems like that's still early, but I think the concept is really exciting. So I want to focus my concepts on the one building, my comments on the one building, which is the comfort station. And I think it's great, but I have some thoughts to help maybe make it a little bit stronger. I'm wondering who the architect team is, who's leading this design. Is there an architect team in place who's leading the design?
There is.
Oh, good.
Yes, it's
Good.
5 Dot
Oh, great.
Architects.
Sharon, great. I know
Yeah.
Sharon. I know five. That's fantastic. Good. I just want to make sure that there was, because it wasn't stated. Couple thoughts about this. I think, there's 4 elements that got to be housed here: the bathrooms, the irrigation room, the tractor room, and the concession. I think that makes sense. I think I love the idea that there's 2 roofs. Maybe these roofs are over the public-facing pieces, the concessions and the restrooms. Those are the areas, and that those roofs slope in to a central green roof that then spills out. I think that is really the idea of the building, and I would like to see the design developed to actually express that idea much stronger or much more clearly than it is right now. It seems to me that we have these brick walls that are extending up above the roof and sort of capturing and almost concealing the roofs that are collecting and distributing the water to the center. And so it kind of makes this little crenellated thing. I think it's such a small building that's, I don't know, I feel like that's getting in the way of expressing the idea. And I could see maybe a stronger and maybe even a bit friendlier expression if those collecting roofs were visually dominant, as instead of concealed behind the parapet, so that they extended out and you could see them, right? Right now they're hidden. If you could see them, I think that would be interesting. I also think, I'm imagining this is probably not a conditioned building, or maybe it just has freeze protection. If that's the case, that's great, because you don't need to have a whole bunch of insulation making a super thick roof overhang. It could be quite elegant. It could be steel, so that it's strong, but it could be quite slim and elegant. And I think that if you could really walk up this building and really see, oh, those 2 things are collecting water, and I see it, and that water's going to this middle piece, and then that middle piece is green, and that water comes out of that middle piece expressively. And I think that it's kind of right now in that rendering on the upper left, that part could be much stronger too, if there was sort of this projecting element like a trough that came out and brought that water down from the green roof. And right now it seems like, so I guess what I'm trying to say is I think it's a great concept. I'd like to see the architecture actually express that concept much more clearly, because I think that's the big idea of the building. I think the other thing I'd like to suggest, elevations. Could you go to the elevation page of this building?
Yep.
I think it would be great to get more refinement of the elevations. I'm looking at the center one there. We have, I think, the openings to the restrooms on the left. We have the water fountain that's just kind of sitting on the facade of the building. It's a little awkward. And then we have 3 doors. We have the person swing door. We have the roll-up door to the tractor, and then obliquely looking at the concessions. It seems like all those things really want to be brought together and, maybe organized with one steel lintel above them. And instead of bringing thin strips of brick down in between them, maybe that's a secondary metal material or something like that. I just feel like there's some refinement that could really bring this together. And then lastly, I'm not convinced by the fan shape. It seems like it's creating a little bit of unnecessary complexity. And if we're excited, or at least I'm excited, maybe about the idea of a concept of the roofs of the public spaces directing water visibly towards a lowered green roof that then sends out expressively. I don't know that you need the kink in the plan to create trapezoidal spaces. I think instead you could just have 3 rectilinear spaces and maybe they're offset from each other in plan, but I think that would allow you to simplify some of the acute and obtuse angle intersections and then develop the expression of this water, I think in a really powerful way. So just questioning that fan shape, it kind of kinks the face of the concessions out towards the street, and which kind of hides them from the main park, right? So, and it kind of creates a focus on the prow, which is really the tractor, which maybe doesn't need to focus. Do you know what I mean? Like that becomes like the center of the building, but it's just the tractor door, which nobody interacts with. So I'd suggest maybe working at the plan to kind of think about that. But I love it, and I just excited about where this piece could go. I do think this piece of architecture is really important, and its function's great. But I think more architectural development to focus on the concept would really bring it together. And I'm really excited to see where this goes. So that's all my comments. If Sharon or anybody wants to respond to my comments, please feel free. I'm just very excited about this.
Thanks, Matt. I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I think we're pretty early. This is like we're just finishing up like schematic design, but I think you hit a lot of the things we're still working out on the head. So thank you for that.
It's just a great project. I'm really excited and glad to get to see it. I'm looking forward to the next steps. Thank you.
And I did ping Jill online, and I think she's just disconnected. So we'll go with Elaine, and then we'll start around the room with Adam.
Yep. And I think we can stay on this slide, and I won't reiterate so a lot of the comments that Matt made, but I share some similar thinking about this building because it is the one building. It will have this prominence from the street, and I think right now it's responding to a lot of utility. And so how can we think about the different facades and make sure that they're interesting. I think about there's this real prominence to the tractor facade and these roll up doors, and and looking back at that from the ball field, like how can we make that more welcoming and provide some more interest? Maybe because we all know what those roll up doors end up looking like. And I know, and to also think about, even though there's this concession area, which I love this idea that it's very community based, but a lot of times it might be in a closed position. And so, sort of anticipating that worst case scenario of like, how can you still try to like activate those facades of the building or bring some interest to them when they're not in use. And then a few of those, what you're noting as event spaces around, you've got provisions for event tents and things. You might think about access to power in the future. And so how you can help facilitate, whether it's, an amplified, music event or just people who might be, selling wares or things like that. And then I think I'm expecting to hear a number of comments based upon questions from the other commissioners. So I'm going to keep mine short. My other interest is still in this park core area. And I mean, I think, it's important to respond to the community and community asks. It's interesting to me because I don't know if Park Core is like a nonprofit group or for-profit group, but I think when I look at those elements and I think about them when they're not being utilized, they don't have a lot of visual interest to me to just sort of see some kind of what look like random pipes and things. And I went back to their website and it looked like some of their origins were about, utilizing urban infrastructure that was already in place. And I know you responded to this question of like wanting to have an area where this parkour system, could be congregated together. But I might just encourage some thinking around how can some of the forms take on more visual interest or be things that might be more readily found in the landscape, as opposed to just a pipe. Or if if some of these concrete walls have some kind of more, detailing to them, or can they function as a seat when it's not being used for, an exercise class? Like, really, how do you make this area function double duty when it's not being used in that class mode? So, because it's just, I mean, it's a lot of space. It's next to that open living room area, and just sort of as a backdrop to that, I think without the activity, like visually right now, and I know it's early stages, it's like lacking some visual interest to it. So just how to think about developing that. And I think with that, but this is a great project. I've used a number of facilities on this, campus, so to speak. And I think, the ability to sort of tie this all together for the community is really wonderful. It's a really ambitious project, and thank you for carrying it forward. And I will turn it over to folks in the room, and it looks like we'll start with Adam.
Thanks, Elaine. And two quick things. It's 11:55, so being a realistic person, I know we're going to 12:15 at a hard stop. And Eric is actually going to close us out as part of the action. So we'll go Adam and then Amalia.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, everyone. We all like this project, I think. I think one of the thing I like the most about it is that it really feels like a place where a bunch of different types of people are going to gather together and be in public together. And I think that's so cool. The number of program elements and art and everything you've integrated, from walking paths. So this really feels like a kind of a living room for the neighborhood. And I think, can't say enough about how cool that is. I guess we're all obsessed with parkour, so here it goes. One of the worst things that can happen on parkour is to have wet feet. And so I would consider, the turf may or may not drain well. I've never seen a parkour facility with a turf surface. And so I would question that and really lean very heavily on parkour visions for what they think an appropriate surface would be for that. Same comment on the rails. I've not seen any powder coated or painted in any way. I would be concerned that could also hurt hands or be slippery on feet. So again, I would rely on parkour visions very heavily rather than an aesthetic choice for the color of the rails. Lighting, this seems like something that people are going to travel from all over the city and or all over the region for, because as you said, there isn't any around. And so I would consider lighting it in the evenings because teenagers, adults, et cetera, are going to travel for this, especially in the evenings, after work, after school. So making sure it's lit. And then on the functionality, I think to Elaine's point, there are a lot of examples of these that are very architectural, some of which are beautiful and function quite well, but some of which are total duds. And so I would really let the program drive the form of it as much as you can, because what Parkour Visions is probably going to want to do is pack it together as tightly as possible to link the elements together, which might not look amazing. But then thinking through, again, a lot of these function okay. Think about early skate parks. They don't function great, people learn a lot, but think even about the surface of the concrete, because if it's too smooth, it'll be difficult. If it's too rough, it'll be difficult. So those are the sorts of details I think folks like Parkour Vision can really help you sort out, but you want to specify down to the finish of the concrete. That's it, no more comments. Thank you.
So I also appreciate all of the different elements that have been put into this space and in a very thoughtful way and very constrained spaces in some respects. So 3 things I want to focus on. One, it feels like there's going to be a lot of materials between what's existing out there and what is being proposed. And I just feel like at the next iteration to be really thoughtful, particularly about the ground surfacing and the cost of transitioning and forming and placing all of those different types of materials that you're talking about throughout this site. I think people give asphalt a bad rap, but that's what's out there now in some of these locations. It's less impactful on the tree roots. Some of these pavement systems you're talking about, like besides the decking, you know, pavers can require a pretty thick section, and just, you know, in the future, if Parks is going to have to maintain this, like asphalt is a potential easier thing to do. And so just be open maybe to that cohesive material and the kind of cost associated with that, and maybe the like literal flexibility of that pavement as opposed to some of the ones that you're talking about. And I think it still meets that accessibility need. The second piece is, I encourage you to really think about the site access and push SDOT to support where you know people are going to come in and how people need to unload and load, how people are going to get here by bike. There has to be bike parking on this site. It has to be safe, it has to be secure, it has to be well lit, and there should probably be one on the south side and the north side. Right now, SDOT has do not cross signs right where you are putting a ton of accessibility right between the community center and Meg Grevens Pool. Push them. Is this appropriate to have no crosswalk? Push them to say, if people are loading and unloading on the west side of 25th, let's just move the parking to the west side. Let them park there and then keep the circulation. There are some low cost things that SCOT could do to really take that $476,000 like further and give you the benefit of not having to accommodate as much parking and being able to work through some of those mutual benefits that you both are going to have. Like, it's actually very sad how the lack of bike infrastructure supports this project. It's really unfortunate. There's good transit service, but we're not adding parking, so people are going to have to get here without a car, or we're going to have to be really focused on where we're allowing cars. This is only going to bring more people to the neighborhood, these improvements. And then I think, again, that like where they're going to focus their efforts on accessibility, really amplify how we want people to exit and light those and make those be the known entrances to the site. And then the last thing is, I do think there's some pinch points with the accessibility. I see kids going off the slide at that one corner, the southeast corner could be a challenge, particularly if this is going to be the loop. And I'd love to see how the interior loop integrates with the exterior loop. That was something that was missing, and I think that ties to the accessibility. So if I could, in closing, offer some more thought about that, because you're putting all these really wonderful elements that are going to draw all these people to this, as has been noted, a very key destination in our city. And it doesn't feel like there's been as much care to that at this point to support these wonderful program elements. So stop there.
Thanks, Paul. You've got one meeting left, so you can wind up.
Get it in. Get it in.
Also, bravo from me. I'm going to encourage you strongly to keep what I think is one of your major strengths already as a large group presenting today. And you also have an art committee, an art group. You've spent a lot of time on this already, working together. I'm going to strongly encourage you to continue that conversation. It's hard in a project that has limits, has construction timelines, has all of those limitations to keep the conversation going. But I think that is your strength, that you're keeping the conversation going among a whole bunch of different people who really want a great space. So that brings up the question of how the art goes forward, and I hope you'll be able to have some back and forth between the overall site programming and design and the artwork, no matter how specific you make it. I think that'll make it stronger, safer, more affordable, more interesting going forward. And definitely, maybe ask your art group to bring some precedents. For example, I immediately think of the City of Olympia, who has a plinth structure based artwork at Percival Landing. This happens to be for temporary projects, but you could just take a look at how people have done projects where you want objects in certain places. Just see how that works, and see if if that meets some of your needs structurally and aesthetically. Parkour, I'm pretty sure it started in France, and I'm pretty sure it started in a suburb that was incredibly underserved and also incredibly diverse, and it continues to be so. I was just trying to check my assumptions on that, but I think I may be correct on that. It's also an art form. It's a movement-based art form. It's one of the reasons it's so popular. It's all about movement. It's about the visuals and the physicality of movement. So I think all these comments about Parker are really important we're responding to your decision to include that. One other thing I did notice, I think Amy said about the north end, you wanted space for kids to hang out. And so that's if you can preserve that, I have this great affection for disaffected teenagers. And I just feel like there's just some places where people can hang. And so I wrote it down because I thought, nobody ever says that in the design, at least I haven't heard it. So on to Erica. No, maybe, is it, maybe, yes. Thanks.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Okay, so I'll also express my appreciation for the community-driven process and how far you all have taken this along the way. So thank you for the update and for managing to squeeze so much program into a presentation. I'll encourage continued coordination with the Office of Arts and Culture, particularly around the complexities of privately funded art in public space. So just let them be a partner to you in thinking about the challenges around that. I also will support the consideration of art as lighting. I just wanted to bring that into this section. I know it came up in the questions section. I will also, regarding the comfort station, I will also support the continued study of the massing related to the plaza size and related to the sight lines. Matt, I thought your massing ideas were an even better solution than the one that I had come up with over here. So I'm really intrigued by those questions about if you're shifting those, if you're straightening that massing out, what does that then do for your sight lines? And also you mentioned the desire for it to be adjacent to a more usable plaza space. And I think there's still some work that can be done to determine whether that's more street facing or more of ballpark facing, and what that interaction between the basketball area and the comfort station looks like on the concession stand side. Also, Amalia encapsulated the bike parking needs, so I'll leave that there. And then for the parkour, I'm curious if inclusion of outdoor classroom when it's not used for parkour is something that's been considered with parkour visions, and would encourage a continued conversation about whether there are kind of seat walls that can be utilized during their sessions, or if that's something that could be usable outside of those times. I would just encourage continued conversation about that and then on their expertise. And that is it. Okay.
I feel like everyone needs a.
Yeah.
So close us out, Erica.
All right, so I'm not going to add any of my own comments because I think we have covered a lot of ground. I'm more going to summarize where I think I'll be pointing our notes for feedback for you all. So I think we'll have a section on art that talks about the integration of art and lighting as you kind of further develop this. We are very excited about, exploring the 7 different cultural significance in this area and having people engaged, and really commend you for all of the engagement that you've had, particularly around the artistic elements. And then I'll make a note about Elaine's mention of bringing in precedents of other plinth-related artwork. There was another section, I think, on funding and just thinking through some of the next steps. I'll add a focus here of it's never too early to think through programming dollars or ongoing maintenance funds. I think we've seen over and over again how our public spaces diminish in their capacity due to the challenges of maintenance. And I think it gets back to a lot of the access points that Amalia was making about the materiality. So knowing what it will take to maintain such a complex array of functionality within a finite and public space like this is something that I think we'll want to see considered in more detail moving forward. I think thinking through some of the access points that a number of people focused in on, but how we can really leverage the investment from SDOT, how bike parking and access from more of a regional standpoint is going to be integrated into the site, and thinking through that a little bit more succinctly. Also, access to and from public transit, which will be critical and already is critical to the uses on this site. Regarding architecture, thinking through the comfort station, considering more of a focus on the prominence of the spaces utilized by people versus the tractor or other sort of required functions, and how the adjustments to the architectural features might provide more interest, both when the building is in use and when it's not, as well as more of a cohesive design of that structure. There was a lot of mention of the parkour elements. I think clearly there's a lot of excitement and desire for this to be the strong element of the plan that you currently have it within, but thinking through the details of the materiality and how possibly this area could have more than one usage given its prominence, and given, you know, the fact that the more this space is used, the better it will be maintained, and the more it'll be sort of celebrated by those that are in and around the space. And then I think just in regards to the outreach, that we really just commend you for what you're doing now, and to keep going with having such a great group and such a large integration of community members into how this project is moving forward. Are there any other big areas that you guys feel like I did not capture?
I just think the continued update on the phase, just continue to update us on the phasing related to the funding.
Great.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for advocating for Jill.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. To update on phasing. Okay, with that, I will move into our action. Do I just ask if we will move forward with?
We'll call for a vote that,
Okay, so at this time, I will call for a vote that we will move forward with the next phase of concept development for the Garfield Superblock project.
And why don't we start with Matt and Jill? Jill, why do I keep saying Jill? Matt and Elaine online, and then we can work around the room. And there will be more, just for Amy and the team. We'll have draft minutes out in about a month that memorializes a lot of what you've heard today, and we'll make sure that we've captured everything right. And if there are any changes, you'll let us know. Why don't we start with Matt?
Oh, sorry. What am I supposed to do, Michael?
Whether or not you vote to approve.
Oh,
Vote
yeah.
to approve.
Thank you. Yes, I vote to approve.
Thanks, Matt. Elaine?
I also vote to approve. Thank you.
And Joe, I don't think you're here. So I guess we're alphabetical order in the room. Adam?
Okay, vote to approve.
Amalia, vote to approve.
Elizabeth, vote to approve.
Erica, vote to approve.
Molly, vote to approve.
That's unanimous. Excellent.
Unanimous vote to approve. You guys will move forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amy and team. Really, it's been a pleasure to hear this presentation and see how the project has advanced in the 2 years that we've seen you, or almost 2 years that we've seen you. So we'll also reach out to you, or I guess I should say, when do you reach out to you not only about the advancement of the minutes, but when it makes sense for you to come back?
Great, thank you. Thank you everyone for your feedback and your comments and listening to our presentation. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.